What do they think about us? It really doesn't matter. What matters is what we think about us.
Somebody call Peter. Somebody call Peter. Bitch niggas, abused bitch niggas. These niggas hoes. Nigga wrist froze on bro. I ain't playing with him, no. Blow a motherfucking fall.
Alright, perfect. Welcome, family and friends. This is another episode of Jerry and Friends. In the light of the college football season, I was like, why not, break down a local team that's pretty close to me. So I'm here with a dear friend of mine. Richard Silva is the official beat writer for the Auburn Tigers at the Montgomery Advertiser. Richard, how you doing today, man?
I'm good, Jerry. How about yourself? I appreciate the nice introduction.
always, man. It's so funny because every time Tommy introduces you, he always brings up your first day story covering Auburn. So would you mind sharing with the world what happened on your first day?
Yeah, so my first day was Halloween of last year, October 31st. And, typical stuff at first day, like onboarding and meeting with Tommy, our boss, and whatnot. And then at noon, 3 or 4 hours into my shift, I get an email from Auburn Athletics. It was one of the first press releases I ever got, and it said, "We've made a change in football leadership." And I was like, does that mean exactly what I think it means? So I called Tommy, and then he, thankfully, Bennett Durando, my predecessor, he had some stuff pre-written. Tommy handled that well. I barely did anything because I was too new to know what to do. So he gets fired. Then they hire John Cohen to be the athletic director. Cadillac gets named the interim coach. So it's a whole big mess of a day, but it makes for a funny story.
Oh yeah, definitely a funny story because it's like I can remember my first day and I'm just like I couldn't handle all that breaking news. Like I would have been like, oh my goodness, but it obviously paid off because you're definitely doing well. Your coverage for Auburn has been pretty stellar this summer. It's been a very busy summer that we'll get to later in the episode. But practices started this week for Auburn, correct?
Yeah, a week. Let's say the 10th. So literally a week ago was the first practice. Players reported on the 2nd, and the 3rd is I believe 9 o'clock, 9:30 on the 3rd. They had their first practice, and today was practice number 6. It's the 4th one we've gotten to view. So yeah.
Okay. And just off the early practices so far, just tell me what you've been seeing. What's the atmosphere like in Auburn going into this 2023 season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I wasn't here for the last coach and the last couple seasons, so all I can base that on is hearsay and stories of what I've heard. But I mean, I'm hesitant to be too optimistic about the team just because there's so many new faces, and of course other teams are very good and improved this offseason. But I mean, it is optimistic. There's, like I said, a lot of new players, a lot of players that look like they're breaking out or making a name for themselves, whether that's first year players, like a handful of freshmen, or some transfers, or even some players that just returned to Auburn that are doing better in this system and under this coaching staff.
Yeah. Kind of just tell me who are some players that kind of opened your eyes a little bit. It was like, oh, this is going to be somebody to watch this up and coming season that maybe not too many people are tuned into.
Yeah, I think I'll do some freshmen and some transfers.
Okay.
In the spring, we learned a whole bunch about Keldrick Falk and Kayan Lee and Connor Liu. We know about those guys and how they're capable. Liu, an interior offensive lineman, Kayan Lee, a cornerback, and Keldrick Falk, a hybrid edge defensive end kind of player. But some of the guys that have really piqued my interest in during this period this past week as freshmen. There's a freshman DB, Sylvester Smith. I believe Auburn flipped him from Tennessee last recruiting cycle.
Mm-hmm.
He's listed as a safety, but he's been getting work as a slot corner in the nickel, kind of at that star position. He's been good. I wouldn't expect him necessarily to start or get on the field early, but I think he's been playing well. Keontae Scott, who I do expect to start in that position, has praised him a little bit. And then in terms of transfers, there's a transfer wide receiver. His name's Caleb Burton. He transferred in from Ohio State. And obviously, Ohio State in the past, I guess, 10 years or so they've had some really good history at receiver. But Caleb Burton's been really good. Hugh Freeze told us at media days that he was kind of a future piece. Mm-hmm. But man, he's looked good. I think he might make an impact kind of sooner rather than later.
That's nice. It's a lot of Auburn guys really big on Burton, and I've watched a little of his film, and I'm pretty excited to see him too. Especially against those SEC talents, they have some of the best secondaries in the country. So if he can translate what he was doing in the Big Ten to the SEC, I think he's going to be a huge asset to this Auburn offense. So kind of sticking to that Auburn offense side, kind of tell me about this the current quarterback situation. What do you think that's going to look like for Auburn?
Yeah, so Hugh told us at SEC media days in Nashville, he told us their plan was kind of through the first 5 practices, about the first 10 days of fall camp, that it would be a three-man race. Peyton Thorne, the Michigan State transfer, Robbie Ashford, the incumbent starter, and Holden Garner, who was a redshirt freshman. And, we've kind of seen that. They've gone back and forth. Payne was out. In the 4 practices we've seen, just off the top of my head, I think Payne was first maybe 3 times and Robbie was first once, or maybe it was 2 and 2. But regardless, it was mostly Payne and Robbie. And I do expect the reps to start getting cut, and one of those guys between Robbie and Payne and Holden cut from the competition. Everybody kind of I wouldn't say has written off Holden, but sees him as the third guy in this race. But I mean, he's been good too. We asked Philip Montgomery about him, and he didn't say this, but he might be Auburn's best pure passer, deep ball passer. Philip was talking about he's got a lot of zip on his balls, and yeah, I mean in the little bit that we've got seen of him, he has looked good, but. Long way of answering your question. If I had to choose who I think was going to eventually be the starter come week 1, I'll land on Peyton Thorne. I just don't think you go get a guy from the portal of his caliber to not play him. And I think he's doing everything right. He's doing everything that he should. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. One thing that's been, a brain teaser for me with this Auburn 2023 year is that September through November stretch of just SEC competition. Once you get into that Texas A&M game on September 23rd, you're followed by Georgia, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, and it just goes on. So just that stretch alone, kind of tell me what are things that you see now that Hugh Freeze is implementing into that team to kind of get their minds ready for that SEC stretch of play in this season?
Yeah, no, I think it is tough. And, traditionally Auburn's had one of the more difficult schedules in the country because you have to play Georgia every year, because you have to play Alabama, because you have to play LSU. And then, those are your yearly matchups. They won't be any longer with the conference changing and divisions dissolving. But, traditionally Auburn's had a really difficult schedule. I think, I don't know if we've been able to see too much of things that he was implementing early, just because we don't get to watch that much practice. But something I do find interesting, and I think about when you asked that question, was there's a video of, so obviously Hugh Freeze, he famously beat Alabama twice while he was at Ole Miss, and there's a video, I believe it's before the game against Alabama, one of the games against Alabama, maybe it's a game against Mississippi State. They actually ended up losing this game, so maybe not the best example to use, but he's pumping up his guys pregame, and he says, let's just go out there, lock the gate, and like let's fight. Like what? Like look for a fight. Like you know what I mean? And not actually fight, but fight and claw. Yeah, they probably are. This team probably is more talented than you, but that's why you play the game. If we just went by off teams that were more talented, it'd just be Madden. We play the games in real life for a reason. But yeah, I think the three toughest games, like you highlighted, two of them are LSU and Georgia, then obviously Alabama at the end of the year. Those three games, I think, they'll be hard pressed to win those, but we'll see.
Oh yeah, and you brought up the main game, that Iron Bowl matchup. Last year it was a real close game until the end. So what does Auburn have to do to ensure that they can compete with Alabama this year? Because I'm not gonna lie, Alabama is a talented team, but I think this year, I'm not going to say it's 50-50 fair, but I wouldn't say Alabama is that much better than Auburn. What do you think about that take?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity for Auburn because of a bit of the uncertainty at quarterback for Alabama. Mm-hmm. Obviously Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, and the Notre Dame transfer, Buckner. The three of them have kind of been competing, and no one knows who's going to start for Alabama. But also you got to remember at the end of the day, Alabama still has a star-studded roster pretty much everywhere else, 4 and 5 stars galore, just everywhere else.
Oh, yeah.
But in addition to that, they do play in Jordan Hare, which has kind of been the great equalizer for them since Saban's been around. Obviously, Saban's been there since 2007. I think they've played 8 times, if I recall the stat correctly, in Jordan Hare, and they're 4 and 4. So Jordan Hare, that environment, it is kind of the great equalizer. And if Hugh Freeze, they win 7, 8, 9 games this year, and one of those wins is against Alabama, you set yourself up very nicely going into year 2.
Oh yeah. I totally agree. And this is kind of far off a little bit, but with the current changing of teams leaving their old conferences going into new conferences and everything, I think, isn't next year Texas and Oklahoma, they'll be in the SEC, correct?
Yes.
So do you know anything about how they're going to rezone the SEC West, SEC East, and how that's going to look in the future once those two teams come?
Yeah, so next year they're obviously adding Texas A&M and Oklahoma, and that gets the SEC up to 16 teams, I believe. And they're dissolving the divisions. So you won't have an SEC West champ and an SEC East champ playing one another for the SEC title. It'll just be the two teams in the conference with the best record. Gotcha. They'll meet in Atlanta for the title game, and obviously whoever wins that game will be the conference champ.
Got you. And I actually like that method better because I can understand the SEC West champ versus SEC East champ, but for some, a lot of people say it was a way for Georgia to not play Alabama, if they was to fall to a you guys or LSU. So I think that would be the most fairest way possible. But overall, I'm pretty excited for this SEC year. It's a lot of talent, just across the conference in general and every team. Aside from Auburn, what other teams do you think is going to make a huge impact in the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think you got to start with Georgia. They'll be my pick to win until they lose again. Mm-hmm. I just think anybody who's not picking them is silly, just because we have 2 years of evidence, and it is tough to three-peat. But I mean, man, they don't look like they're going to slow down.
Oh yeah.
And then honestly, next, some people might say LSU, and I don't want to discredit LSU or try to knock them down, but I do think next up on my list would be Alabama, just because I don't see Saban and that team just stewing and this whole offseason and watching everybody and hearing everybody say, oh, the dynasty's over, and Alabama's, they got questions at quarterback, they're gonna only win 10 games or whatever. I don't see them that sitting well with them. I think even a few players in Nashville, they said they hear the disrespect, and it is, sounds cliche, but it is bulletin board material. Mm-hmm. I do believe that for them. And then, I mean, just some other teams that I'm looking at, obviously LSU. I do think I've settled on that I think Texas A&M is going to do well this year. I just don't see the worst-case scenario happening for them 2 times in a row. Mm-hmm. And I like South Carolina, too. I think they might be a surprise team in the East. Not to unseat Georgia, but maybe could push Tennessee for that number 2 spot.
Nah, and I actually like that you said that because, South Carolina at the end of last year, they made a crazy run at the end. And a lot of people were kind of like doubting Spencer Rattler a little bit. But I think that Tennessee game, he kind of showed like, hey, I can still potentially, I may not be a first-round quarterback anymore, but I can sneak my way into the second, third round. But I think South Carolina is going to be a sneaky team in the SEC East as well. Kind of tell me how you're feeling about this Cal matchup that Auburn faces this year. You're going to be traveling to the Pac-12. How excited are you about that?
Yeah, the farthest I've been out west was I went to Arizona for a few days. That was, I think 2021 or something, maybe 22. But anyway, I've never been to California, so I'm excited to get out there. But, I do think it'll be interesting. Cal, kind of like Auburn last year, had a disappointing season. I believe they went 4-8. And again, similar to Auburn, they have a large transfer portal class. I think Auburn brought in 20 some around 2 dozen transfers. Cal kind of did the same. So I do think it'll be interesting to see that. I also do think that Auburn should win. It's tough going cross country. Auburn's never played in Berkeley before. It's a late kickoff. I forget the exact time, but in Central Time and Auburn time, it's either like a 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. kickoff. It's late.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's late, but I think Auburn should handle their business against them and ultimately leave Berkeley with a win. I'd be shocked if they didn't.
Yeah, and that's one of those early games. So I think that game is going to like serve as a staple and like kind of like give them the momentum that they need for that matchup in 2 weeks against Texas A&M. But to kind of look ahead, this year, if you can give Auburn a record for 2023, honestly, what would it be?
So the way I look at it is, in my opinion, there's kind of 5 gimmies on the schedule, games you got to have. It's the 4 non-conference matchups plus Vandy. Even though Vandy's on the road and Auburn hasn't necessarily traditionally played well in Vanderbilt, I think Auburn should beat Vanderbilt. I don't think that's like a hot take to say.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, I think you should have 5 automatic wins.
Okay.
Then there's 3, not automatic losses, but gosh, I don't think you're going to beat Georgia. I don't think you're going into LSU and beating LSU. And I'm just not going to pick you to beat Alabama. So I think you got 3 losses. So that leaves you with 4 regular season games. You've got the Mississippi schools, Ole Miss and Mississippi State. You've got Arkansas and the 4th school slipping me, that other one. But those are your kind of your toss-ups. I think you've got to split those. So, you got the 5 built-in ones. You split the toss-ups. That get you about 7 wins. I think 7-5 is a good regular season record for them. Go to a bowl game. Obviously, depends on who you match up with. I think Auburn fans should feel good. The coaching staff should feel good if you get 7-5, win your bowl game 8-5, and head into year 2 feeling pretty good.
Yeah, and especially with year 2 for Coach Hugh Freeze, next year he has a pretty loaded recruiting class coming in, especially on the defensive side. Kind of let's dive into that and tell me some of your favorite players in that next year's recruiting class for Auburn.
Yeah, I think I'll start with Perry Thompson. I think he might be the highest rated recruit in the class. Obviously 5-star, flipped from Alabama last month. I believe it was last month. Talk about they've been making with these commitments, statement after statement after statement. That one was huge. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like I said, you flip them from Alabama, and Auburn doesn't traditionally have a history of like elite pass catchers. They have 2 1,000-yard receivers ever in the history of the program.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, it is nuts. Like traditionally, they're a defensive and run first team. Mm-hmm. I believe the last time a receiver had 1,000 yards was in 1999. So it's been a long time. I say all that to say, they're able to get this kid, this elite recruit, this elite receiver, without having that history to sell to him. Obviously Hugh Freeze can sell his own history. Hugh has had good offenses, has had prolific receivers in the past, but Auburn hasn't. So I think that's big to kind of have that win. And I mean, if he pans out, it's wrong to put expectations like this on a guy that's not even signed to Auburn yet.
Mm-hmm.
But if Perry signs and if he works out, gosh, he could be one of the best receivers ever in Auburn history.
Wow.
That's one on the offensive side I really like. And then on the defensive side, they've got I think DeMarcus Riddick was a really big recruiting win for them. That was a few days, I think that was on a Wednesday, and Perry flipped on that following Saturday. I think DeMarcus, you flip him from Georgia, which is obviously a big, again, statement in itself. You also keep him away from Alabama. And I just think he's a really good, stud linebacker. And, they're up to 15 commitments at this point. I believe they're number 16 in the country in the 247 composite. But when you look at average recruit, I want to say they're fifth. They're behind just a handful of others like Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia. There's another school in there that I can't remember off the top of my head. But I think they've got really good quality. And, over the next 4 months until early signing day, and then there's National Signing Day in February when the class gets locked in, I think, they have a chance to stay in that top 10 range. You had a few more guys. You had a few more 4 or 5 stars. I don't know if there are any more 5 stars. You had a few more 4 stars, and you're feeling really good.
Yeah, and I totally agree because they're up to 15 commits now, and the season hasn't even started yet. Like you said, National Signing Day is not till February. So imagine you get like 3 to 4 more 4 stars. Like that rank, that number 16 rank can easily be a top 10. And I really think depending on how Auburn does this year, it can attract a lot more the way they're flipping guys from these SEC guys because, NIL is playing a big part in recruiting where it's anybody's ball game, like you can say you're committing to one school now and then in an instant, boom, I'm flipping, I'm going to another school. So I really think Auburn is going to like turn some heads, after this year. And, by February, hey, they may be up to 20 commits, 25. So that'll definitely be something nice to see. Overall, how excited are you just to be covering in the SEC region? A lot of journalists, they kind of like wish they were in this position, covering like a dominant school who's going against dominant teams. Just tell me the overall feeling because this is your second year, correct? Am I correct?
So I actually, the last season, I caught the last month.
The last month,
4.
yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So this is my first job out of college, which extremely blessed to have that opportunity to, like you said, to cover an SEC team straight out of college.
Mm-hmm.
But this will be my first season covering each game, game 1 to game 12 and beyond if they have a postseason.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm extremely excited. I'm the road trip I'm most excited for is LSU. I hope that's a night game in Death Valley. That I don't know if there's a better environment in college football, in college sports, to be frank.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm super excited about that. And then just to be in Jordan-Hare every other week. I mean, I know that stadium is electric in its own right. It's top 5, top 10 stadium in the country.
Oh yeah. And my first time going to Jordan-Hare, it was that rainy spring game, the weekend I moved down here, and I was just like, whoa, like this is massive. Like I've been to different college stadiums. I've been to Athens, and I was like, whoa. Auburn is definitely in my top 5 that I've seen. Like it's huge. So I'm pretty excited, when I finally get to go to my first Auburn game just to see the electricity because, a lot of different people I talk to, they tell me, they was like, you haven't experienced nothing until you go to an Auburn game. And, you see the eagle soaring through the crowd. And, the electricity there is just epic. So, it's definitely going to be an exciting year, man.
Yeah, and I think you saw it a little bit. At least I saw it a little bit last year. When Auburn welcomed Texas A&M, and it was Cadillac's first home game as the interim coach. The place was sold out. It was insane. I'll always remember some of the media. We walked out onto the main concourse so we could just be in it. So like the pregame for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And Cadillac's walking onto the field. These guys, I think Colby Wood and Jalen Simpson on either side of him, and Cole Kubik's interviewing him. It's on the main screen and
chatting about Auburn football. Any last words? Where can people follow you?
Yeah, no, I again appreciate you having me on. You can read all my written work at themontgomeryadvertiser.com. Just, toggle over to sports and then the Auburn section. And on Twitter, I'm at Rich_Silva. That's SILVA 18.
Perfect. Appreciate you, Richard. Thank you so much, man.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Jack.